On December 4th, 1951, about 75 years ago, a group of young boys, Royal Marine Cadets, were marching down that road behind me on their way to a boxing match. They were full of excitement, they couldn't wait to get there, and then the unthinkable happened. What followed was one of Kent's worst road disasters. And for some, 75 years later, that pain is still as fresh as it was the day it happened. This is the story of the Gillingham Bus Disaster. Right, I've had to come over here just off Dock Road because it is just way too loud over there. It is a busy road. Certainly slightly more busy than it was in 1951, let's put it that way. You're probably not going to be having many cadet marches down this road now, unless they're going single file. The group were walking from their base at Melville Barracks in Gillingham to the Royal Naval Barracks at Chatham. What was supposed to be an evening of bonding with their fellow cadets, watching some boxing, and the promise of hot food and good entertainment on a cold winter's night, became a scene of horror. These cadets were just boys. They were children. There were 52 of them and they were all aged between 9 and 13 years old. Now at the time in 1951, Dock Road here was barely lit. There was no such thing as high visibility vests. No one was wearing anything with reflective tape on it. And the worst part of this was at the very back of the column of cadets marching were the youngest members. Some of them had barely even been issued uniforms, they were so new. And of course, they were the first to be hit. A double-decker bus emerged through the dark and fog and ploughed straight into the back of the marching cadets. The driver of the bus was 57-year-old John Sampson, a former tram conductor who had over 10 years' experience driving buses. When questioned afterwards, he said he thought he'd been driving at about 15 to 20 miles per hour. He was driving without headlights. It was the evening in December, winter. It was getting dark. You might think, well, that's ridiculous. It's completely on him. You need to be driving with headlights on. But at the time, it just wasn't done, to the extent that it wasn't illegal to be driving around at night with no headlights on. At most, you were required to have your side lights on, but that was it. And you've got to remember, this is a time when there's much less traffic on the roads than there is now, so it kind of makes sense. And you can see from looking at Dock Road that with these high walls on either side, it's very enclosed, so no headlights, barely lit. You can see how it would have been hard to see anything coming down this road. And fate hadn't been kind to either him nor the cadets that he was about to hit, as he approached, they walked through a section of the road that was darker than usual on an already dark street because a street light there had failed. And because of this, Sampson said he'd never seen the cadets. The inquest at the Royal Naval Hospital revealed some of the horrifying details of what happened. They found that the boys had been marching in formation, so 3 abreast, with an officer moving up and down the column to keep an eye on them. As he drove down the hill, Sampson said he noticed it was pretty dark with black patches. And he also noticed that there was a particularly dark stretch of road ahead. He later said,
"I don't think it was too difficult to see, but it was very dark. I could see far enough, as I thought, to see anything looming up. But when I got to that dark patch, I couldn't see anything."
As the cadets had reached that same dark spot, Lieutenant Carter was at the back of the column, standing on the edge of the pavement, when he spotted Sampson's bus and shouted at the boys to keep well in. But he'd seen it too late, and at that point, there was nothing they could do.
I heard a terrific noise. I can't quite sum up what the noise sounded like, but it might have been the screeching of brakes or something like that. I turned my head and I saw the bus coming straight towards me.
Also at the rear of the column was 12-year-old Lance Corporal Alan Brazier, who was one of the NCOs supervising the new recruits. He told the inquest a few days later,
"I saw it coming. I thought it was too late for it to miss us. I shouted, 'Look out!' I pulled Jarrett onto the pavement when I shouted. 3 other boys jumped onto the pavement and they and Jarrett weren't injured."
In Sampson's statement to the police that night, he said,
"I suddenly felt as if the bus had run over a lot of loose stones or something. The steering wheel wobbled in my hand. I applied my brakes immediately and stopped within a few yards. I thought I'd hit a car or something that had been on the road without lights. I jumped out of the cab to see what had happened. There was a lot of screaming and shouting, and I saw I'd run into a squad of cadet boys. I've been using my 2 wing lights when driving down the road. I very seldom drive down there with my headlights on. I was keeping well in on the side of the road and could see the curb. The rear rank of the cadets was not carrying a light, and with their dark blue uniform, it wasn't possible to see them.
Dorothy Dunster, who was the conductress on board the bus at the time, also felt the bumps, and this is how she described what she felt.
I was not afraid, but I just began to wonder what had happened. Sammy didn't know at first what he'd gone over until afterwards. I felt his brakes go and the bus stopped. I got out. I called out to Sammy, "What's happened?" And he replied, "I don't know." He didn't sound alarmed, he didn't really realise anything had happened. He got out of his cabin and said, "What have we hit?" I walked up the road and I saw the youngsters lying on the floor. Poor Sammy said, "What have I done?" That's all he said. Then he just stared. He was stunned and dazed. He couldn't believe it. I went to try and help the kids, but I couldn't do anything. I've no nursing experience.
One petty officer who arrived to pick through the casualties was quoted as saying,
As soon as I heard of the accident, I rushed to help. I saw some pretty grim things in many places throughout the war, but this was too much for me. I had to come away.
Of the company of 52 boys who, remember, were aged between 9 and 13, 17 were killed instantly. 7 more were taken to hospital, 6 of whom succumbed to their injuries later that night. And one, John Burdett, died a few days later, bringing the total number of dead to 24. And another 18 were left injured, some of those being injured so severely that they were left disabled. It immediately became Kent's worst road disaster, only being surpassed by a crash decades later. The verdict was accidental death. But at the Central Criminal Court, Sampson was convicted of dangerous driving, and his sentence? A £20 fine and a 3-year driving ban. I know we're talking about the 1950s here, but it still hardly seems fair. Here we are back in Woodland Cemetery in Gillingham. Spent a lot of time here recently, and this is where our Royal Marine Cadets are buried. 19 of the boys are laid to rest here in front of me, and some others were buried in separate Catholic sections and some in private family graves, but most of them are right here. It's such a tragedy standing here and looking at the names, the ages. Obviously, they were kids. Like, I don't know why I should be so shocked, but just seeing them all lying here together, yeah, it just really hits home. And the fact that some of their family members have obviously wanted to be buried in the same place. They carried on, they lived their lives, but they never forgot their children, their brothers, sons, and yeah, they rejoined them in death. This one is particularly awful. You know, it's one thing people serving in a war on the battlefield, even the, accidental deaths that occur within war but not during battle or not during action. But this was, these were kids who didn't even have the chance to serve their country. It was taken away from them in this horrible accident. And as lots of the messages here on these headstones convey, they barely had a chance to live, but in the short time they were here, they lit up the lives of those around them. Now, after the accident, the bus company actually paid a sum of £10,000 to the parents of the 24 boys who had died. But unfortunately, I've seen during my research that in the decades that followed, it turned out to be incredibly difficult for that money to find its way to the people that needed it. Some of that money was spent on memorials for the dead, and some of it was given to the boys who had been left disabled by the accident. But because there was so much uncertainty about what to do with the rest of the money, it wasn't actually until the 1990s that some of it was actually used to restore the cadets' graves and put up a memorial. And as we can see, the memorial that is in place on Dock Road today was placed there on the 2nd of December 2001 by Prince Philip, 50 years after the accident had taken place. In the wake of the tragedy, some changes were thankfully made. Street lighting in the Medway towns was improved, and from that incident on, every group of cadets marching on a public road were required to have a red light at the back of the group. I actually found that the Kent Online website, as part of the 70th anniversary, interviewed the sister of one of the boys who died. Maddie Hooker, sister of Keith, told Kent Online that her mother had tried to get back before he left to meet his friends and head to the boxing match, but she never made it back in time, and ultimately never got to say goodbye. And Maddie, who was only 7 at the time, clearly still remembers that December and that Christmas as clearly as the day it happened. She said she still tries to attend the commemorative service every year, and that it always makes her wonder what life would have been like if Keith had still been alive. Finally, she said her thoughts are with her mum, and that they still attend every year for her, for the mother who never got the chance to say goodbye to her son. Thanks for joining me for another video. Hopefully you'll agree this was an important one to make, because I think it's even more important to remember those who barely even had a chance to live their lives. It's really awful. Thanks for watching anyway, and if you like the video, like and subscribe for more stuff like this, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one.